By sunrise, 48 shipments would fail unless Victoria Hayes called the man she had rejected 7 times. The sentence appeared on no official report, no executive summary, no polished slide deck, but everyone in the boardroom felt it before anyone was brave enough to say it. At 4:18 in the morning, the glass walls of Hayes Meridian Logistics reflected a room full of people pretending that numbers were still under control. They were not. The main screen at the front of the room showed a map of the Midwest glowing red from Indianapolis to Des Moines, from St. Louis to Grand Rapids, each red marker representing a trailer sitting where it should not be, a driver who had not arrived, a refrigerated load losing time, a factory shipment already past its delivery window. Victoria Hayes stood at the head of the conference table with one hand resting beside an untouched cup of coffee. She was 32 years old, sharp, composed, and accustomed to solving problems before they reached her face. That morning, the problem had reached the face of every person in the room. Derek Sloan, her operations director, stood near the screen with his tablet in both hands, speaking in the controlled tone executives use when bad news has been trimmed into something more presentable. "We are experiencing a temporary capacity disruption," he said. Nobody answered. Temporary had expired 2 hours ago. Capacity disruption was a clean phrase for 48 loads stranded across 5 states and a national retail contract that would trigger penalties by noon. Victoria looked at the map, then at Derek. "How many confirmed carriers?" Derek swallowed once. 4. "How many can move before 6? He looked down at the tablet. 1, possibly 2. A regional manager named Claire Donnelly, seated halfway down the table, had not spoken since the emergency call began. She had been staring at her laptop with the pale expression of someone watching the only viable answer become politically inconvenient. Victoria noticed. "Claire." The room turned toward her. Claire hesitated, then rotated her laptop slightly so the screen faced the table. "There is one fleet with available tractors, reefer capacity, and verified Midwest coverage before sunrise." Derek's jaw tightened before she said the name, which told Victoria the answer was already a problem. Claire continued anyway. "Mason Coal Logistics." The name landed with a small, brutal silence. Victoria did not move at first. She knew the name. Not well, not personally, not in the way people know those they respect, but in the way a closed door remembers the hand that knocked too many times. Mason Coal. Small carrier. Single father. Old trucks. 7 applications. 7 rejections. Derek spoke quickly. "No. Absolutely not. They are not a Hayes Meridian primary vendor." Claire looked at the screen. "They have a 98.7% on-time rate over the last 18 months. With small regional clients," Derek said. "Not our scale." Victoria's pen stopped between her fingers. It had been tapping lightly against the table, a sound no one had dared acknowledge. Now even that was gone. "Can they move the freight?" she asked. Derek turned toward her. "Victoria, we have standards." Claire's voice stayed quiet. "Right now, he is the only one meeting the standard that matters." The boardroom went still again. Outside the glass, the city was dark, the kind of dark that comes before working people start their day and executives realize theirs never ended. Victoria looked back at the red map. Medical equipment in Joliet. Refrigerated food in Cedar Rapids. Automotive parts outside Fort Wayne. Every hour mattered. Every delay had a customer attached to it, a penalty attached to it, a promise Hayes Meridian had already made in writing. She had built her company on the belief that systems did not depend on one person. Yet at 4:18 in the morning, with every expensive partner failing in sequence, the only name still moving belonged to the man she had once dismissed before reading past the second page of his file. Derek stepped closer, lowering his voice as though volume could hide fear. Calling him would be a mistake. Victoria looked at him then, fully. "Bigger than this?" He had no answer. Claire's laptop screen glowed between them. Mason Cole Logistics. Available capacity. 31 active trucks. Regional emergency coverage. Highest reliability rating in the zone. Victoria set her pen down carefully. The sound was small, but everyone heard it. 3 years earlier, she had watched that name leave her lobby for the 7th time and felt nothing. Now her company's morning depended on whether Mason Cole would answer the phone. 3 years earlier, Mason Cole stood in the lobby of Hayes Meridian Logistics for the 7th time with a contractor packet under one arm and his 8-year-old son beside him, trying very hard not to touch anything expensive. The lobby was all glass, white stone, and polished metal, the kind of place where footsteps sounded too loud and people learned to lower their voices without being told. Mason wore a dark work jacket that had been clean when he left the house but now carried a faint line of dust near the cuff from checking a trailer light before sunrise. Owen held a red toy semi-truck in both hands, rolling one plastic wheel with his thumb while he watched the elevators open and close. He had missed the school bus that morning because Mason's sitter cancelled at 6:15, and Mason had brought him along the way single parents bring children along when life does not offer a cleaner option. At the reception desk, the woman with the headset recognized him by then. She did not say it. She only gave him the careful smile people give when they know the answer before the question arrives. "Mr. Cole, Mr. Sloan will be down shortly." Mason nodded. "Thank you." He did not sit. He had learned that sitting made Owen think they might be there long. Derek Sloan came out of the elevator 8 minutes later with a tablet in his hand and Victoria Hayes walking beside him, already reading something on her phone. Mason straightened, not dramatically, just enough to respect the room. "Ms. Hayes," he said. Victoria looked up, polite but distant. She had the composed attention of a person who had learned to spend only the exact amount of time a matter deserved. Derek held out his hand before Mason could pass over the folder. "I reviewed the updated packet." Mason gave it to him anyway. Derek did not open it. "We appreciate your persistence." In a lobby like that, persistence sounded almost like a defect. Owen looked up at his father, then back down at the toy truck. Victoria glanced at the folder in Derek's hand. "This is the regional carrier application." Derek nodded. "Same applicant. 2 tractors at last review. Limited warehouse relationships. No national lane history." Mason kept his voice even. "4 tractors now. 2 reefers leased. Insurance updated. Safety record is clean. I included confirmed delivery history for the last 12 months." Derek smiled without warmth. "Small delivery history." Victoria looked at Mason then, fully enough to make refusal feel official. "Mr. Cole, Hayes Meridian requires carriers who can absorb volume changes without operational risk. Your company is not built for contracts at our scale." The words were not cruel. That made them harder to answer. They were smooth, professional, and final. Mason felt Owen shift beside him. The red toy truck slipped from the boy's hands and clicked once against the polished floor. The sound traveled farther than it should have. Mason bent, picked it up, and placed it back in Owen's hands before he picked up his own folder from where Derek had set it flat on the reception counter. "Understood," Mason said. Derek's expression suggested he doubted that. "Come back when your company looks like one." Victoria did not correct him. She was already turning toward the elevators because the meeting that mattered was somewhere above the lobby, behind glass, with people whose fleets arrived in matching paint. Mason looked at the closed folder, then at his son. He did not defend himself. He did not explain that every truck he owned had passed inspection, that every driver he worked with slept when they were supposed to sleep, that every route he accepted was delivered because his name was still small enough to be attached to every promise. He only held the lobby door open for Owen and stepped into the cold air outside. Behind them, the building reflected the morning like nothing important had happened. Owen walked beside him across the parking lot, quiet for almost 20 yards. "Dad," he said finally, do they not like us? Mason stopped beside his old pickup and looked at his son carefully. They do not know us yet. Owen looked back at the glass building. Mason opened the passenger door and waited until the boy climbed in. He placed the red toy semi-truck on the dashboard for a moment before handing it back. Some people see size before they see truth, Mason said. That does not mean we stop building. Then he closed the door gently, walked around to the driver's side, and drove away from Hayes Meridian for the last time as a man asking for permission. Mason did not drive home angry. Anger took fuel, and fuel cost money. He drove through the industrial edge of the city with Owen quiet beside him, the red toy semi-truck resting in the boy's lap, and the contractor packet lying face down on the seat between them like a door that had finally stopped pretending it might open. The old pickup heater clicked more than it warmed. A thin line of morning frost clung to the lower edge of the windshield. Mason kept both hands on the wheel and let the glass tower shrink in the rearview mirror until it became one more shape behind him. He had spent enough years around freight to know the difference between a closed lane and a dead end. A closed lane meant you found another route. Before Owen was born, before the medical bills, before the house felt too quiet after 8 at night, Mason had been one of the best dispatchers at a regional carrier outside Columbus. He knew how weather moved across I-70 before the alerts caught up. He knew which drivers could handle mountain grades, which warehouses wasted time at dock doors, which fuel stops looked cheap until the miles made them expensive. He could look at a load board at 4 in the morning and see problems that would not become visible to managers until noon. Men with larger offices called it instinct. Mason called it paying attention. Then his wife, Hannah, got sick, and life stopped being organized by lanes and delivery windows. It became organized by appointments, school pickups, pill bottles, insurance calls, and the small mathematics of keeping a child fed while the person you loved grew tired in a way sleep could not fix. After she passed, Mason stayed with dispatch for 3 more months, mostly because he did not know what else to do. But the hours were built for people with someone waiting at home, and Owen had started falling asleep in the break room after school, his backpack under his head and the red toy truck tucked beneath one hand. Mason resigned on a Friday, shook the owner's hand, and bought his first used tractor 2 weeks later with savings, a small loan, and more faith than any bank should have accepted. The truck was 12 years old, white under faded decals, with 480,000 miles and a driver's seat worn smooth on the left edge. Raymond Pike, a 61-year-old driver with silver hair and a coffee habit that looked permanent, looked it over for him in a gravel lot behind a repair shop. "She is ugly," Raymond said. Mason waited. Raymond tapped the hood twice. "But ugly can work." That was the beginning. Not a ribbon cutting. Not a website launch. Just one old tractor, one father, one retired driver willing to take part-time routes, and a boy doing math homework on a folding chair beside a stack of tire invoices. Mason learned to repair what he could, pay quickly when he could not, and say no to loads that required drivers to pretend they were not tired. He took the routes larger carriers dismissed as inconvenient, overnight bakery runs, rural hospital supply drops, emergency machine parts, produce loads that had to cross state lines before dawn. He did not promise what he could not deliver. That made growth slower. It also made people remember him. That night after the 7th rejection, Mason parked beside the rented garage he used as an office and let the engine tick itself cool. Owen had fallen asleep with the toy truck against his chest. Mason sat for a moment in the blue dark before sunrise turned fully into morning. Then he carried his son inside, laid him on the small couch under a clean blanket, and went back out to the yard. The first tractor waited under a work light with its hood open, cold metal shining where he had cleaned the fittings the night before. Mason took off his jacket, rolled his sleeves, and picked up a wrench. He did not know that Victoria Hayes would one day need him. He did not need to know. He only knew Owen would wake up in a few hours and ask what came next, and Mason wanted the answer to be something better than waiting outside someone else's door. Mason learned over the next 14 months that rejection could be polite, automated, forwarded, reworded, and dressed in compliance language, but it still did the same thing. It kept the door closed. The first email from Hayes Meridian said his insurance limits did not match their updated carrier requirements. He raised them, even though the premium made his kitchen table budget look thinner than it already was. The second said his maintenance records lacked standardized digital formatting. He built a system himself at midnight after Owen fell asleep, scanning inspection sheets, repair invoices, tire logs, brake reports, fuel receipts, and driver notes until the old laptop fan sounded like it was trying to leave the house. The third rejection mentioned limited refrigerated capacity. Mason leased 2 reefers on terms that made him read every line 3 times before signing. The fourth said his fleet size remained insufficient for surge coverage. He added a third tractor, then a fourth, each one used, each one inspected harder than anything newer on a dealership lot. Every time he reached the line moved. Derek Sloan's name sat at the bottom of most messages, neat and final above the Hayes Meridian signature block. Mason did not know the whole reason then. He did not know Derek had built a comfortable circle of preferred vendors who answered his calls first, bought the dinners, sent the gifts, and understood that certain relationships survived because no one looked too closely at why they were protected. Mason only knew the requirements changed whenever he met them. On paper, it was policy. In practice, it was a hallway with no end. Victoria Hayes saw his file only in fragments, when Derek included it in vendor summaries with phrases that sounded responsible: insufficient scale, limited national exposure, regional reliability and proven, operational risk. She trusted those phrases because they matched the world she believed in. Large carriers made large promises. Polished systems produced polished outcomes. Small companies were admirable until they became inconvenient. She was not trying to bury Mason Cole. That was almost worse. He was not important enough to bury. At Mason's house, the Hayes Meridian folder lived on the kitchen table beside Owen's homework, grocery receipts, and a cracked coffee mug with a faded trucking logo. Some nights Owen worked on multiplication problems while Mason checked compliance sheets under the yellow light above the stove. The boy would ask what a certificate meant, what a lane was, why grown-ups needed so many forms to know whether someone did good work. Mason answered as plainly as he could. "Paper matters," he said one night, aligning insurance pages with 2 fingers. "But paper is supposed to prove the truth, not replace it." Owen thought about that and went back to his homework. The 5th rejection came during a rainstorm while Mason was changing a mud flap in the yard. The 6th arrived while he was sitting in the pickup outside Owen's school, early because the boy had a spelling bee and Mason had promised to be there before the first word. The 7th happened in person in the glass lobby, with Victoria walking away and Derek telling him to come back when his company looked like one. After that, Mason stopped applying. Not because Derek had one. Because Mason finally understood that his company could spend years trying to look acceptable to people who did not want to see it, or it could become necessary to people who actually needed freight moved. He chose the second. He took down the Hayes Meridian checklist from the corkboard in the garage office and replaced it with a route map. Raymond Pike watched him do it from the doorway, holding a paper cup of coffee. "About time," Raymond said. Mason pinned the map flat, smoothed one corner, and marked 3 rural hospital routes in blue. "We still build to the standard," Mason said. Raymond nodded. "Just not for them." Outside, rain tapped lightly on the metal roof, and the first 4 trucks sat in a row under the yard lights, old but clean, small but ready. Mason looked at them for a long moment. Then he picked up the phone and called a produce broker in Fort Wayne who had been asking if he could handle overnight loads nobody else wanted. By dawn, his trucks were moving east. The first overnight produce run paid less than Mason wanted and taught him more than any contract Hayes Meridian had refused to give him. The pickup time was 11:40 at night outside Fort Wayne, the temperature was 32 degrees, and the loading dock supervisor looked at Mason's 4-truck operation with the same expression people used when they expected disappointment to arrive before morning. Mason did not argue. He checked the reefer temperature himself, confirmed the seal number, reviewed the delivery window twice, and sent Raymond Pike east with a thermos of black coffee and a route that avoided 2 construction delays the broker had forgotten to mention. The load arrived 18 minutes early. Mason wrote the time on the maintenance board in the garage office, not because anyone important was watching, but because the habit mattered. That was how the fleet grew. Not quickly. Not loudly. One ugly route at a time. Rural clinics that needed supplies before breakfast. Machine parts for a factory outside Dayton that could not restart without them. Refrigerated food that had to cross state lines before the sun warmed the pavement. Winter deliveries on county roads where larger carriers declined because the margins were thin and the drivers complained. Mason took only what he could finish, and he finished what he took. By the end of the first year after he stopped applying to Hayes Meridian, 4 trucks had become 7. By the next spring, 7 had become 12. None of them matched perfectly. 1 was blue, 2 were white, 1 still carried the shadow of an old logo under the new paint, and every one of them had been inspected until Mason knew it sounds the way other people knew voices. He built a maintenance board on the garage wall with rows for brakes, tires, oil, filters, reefer checks, driver hours, and notes written in block letters because tired people needed clear words. Raymond called it old-fashioned. Then he started using it more than anyone. Mason hired drivers the big companies had. Learned to overlook, a mother returning to the road after raising 2 children, a quiet veteran who hated office politics but loved perfect logs, an older driver with one knee that complained in the cold and 30 years of clean miles behind him. He did not ask them to run illegal hours. He did not punish them for telling the truth about weather, fatigue, or equipment. He paid when he said he would pay, even in weeks when that meant he waited to pay himself. Owen grew with the fleet. At first, he sat at the folding table doing homework while diesel engines warmed outside. Later, he learned to restock bottled water in the driver's room, wipe down the coffee counter, and place colored magnets on the route board under Mason's supervision. On the morning the first truck received the new Mason Coal Logistics logo, Owen pressed the decal flat against the driver's door with both palms, his red toy semi-truck sitting on the gravel at his feet. He stepped back, serious as a man twice his age, and asked if it looked like a real company now. Mason looked at the truck, then at the boy. It looked real before the sticker, he said. But he took a photograph anyway. The yard changed slowly after that. More gravel. Better lights. A second fuel tank. A used office trailer with a roof that leaked until Mason fixed it himself. A coffee pot that never seemed to be empty before dawn. Drivers began arriving early not because Mason demanded it, but because nobody wanted to be the reason the board turned red. Dispatch calls became shorter because everyone knew the system. Check the load. Check the weather. Check the driver. Check the truck. Then move. It was not glamorous. It was not the kind of operation that looked impressive from a glass conference room. But when a route went bad, brokers started calling Mason before they called anyone else. When snow closed one highway, his drivers already knew the second road. When a reefer unit threw a warning code in the dark, Mason answered the phone on the second ring and talked the driver through the fix in a voice calm enough to keep panic out of the cab. By the time Mason Coal Logistics reached 31 active trucks, Owen was old enough to understand that the fleet had not been built from revenge. It had been built from mornings before sunrise, promises kept, and the quiet refusal to let someone else's opinion become the size of your life. The collapse at Hayes Meridian did not begin with alarms. It began with small red boxes appearing on a dashboard that everyone assumed someone else would clear. A delivery outside Peoria missed its dock window by 26 minutes. A refrigerated load in western Indiana sat too long while the assigned carrier searched for a replacement driver. A trailer of automotive parts reached a crossdock in Ohio with no tractor waiting on the other side. Each failure looked manageable alone. Together, they formed a pattern that should have scared someone sooner. Derek Sloan saw the pattern first and named it temporary. Then he named it weather. Then he named it vendor adjustment. By the time Victoria Hayes stood in the boardroom at 4:18 in the morning, the language had run out and the map had turned red. 48 shipments were stranded across 5 states. Medical equipment sat in Joliet with a delivery deadline tied to hospital scheduling. Refrigerated food outside Cedar Rapids was losing safe travel time by the hour. Factory parts near Fort Wayne were already late enough to threaten a production line. A national retail contract, the kind Hayes Meridian had spent 2 years chasing, would trigger penalties by noon if the freight did not move. Victoria looked at the screen and felt the particular stillness that comes when a person realizes the room has been calmer than the truth. Executives sat around the conference table with laptops open and faces lit pale by data they no longer trusted. Claire Donnelly kept one hand near her keyboard, waiting because she had already found the answer and already understood why Derek did not want it spoken. Derek stood at the front with his tablet, tie loosened by a 1/4 inch, voice steady enough to be suspicious. "We still have partner capacity in the region," he said. Victoria did not look away from the map. "Show me confirmed tractors." Derek tapped the tablet. "We have pending responses." "Confirmed," she said. The word cut cleanly through the room. Derek paused. Not enough. No one moved. Outside the glass wall, the city remained dark, but inside the boardroom morning had already become expensive. Victoria turned from the screen to Derek. "How long have you known we were exposed on these lanes?" He looked offended first. "That was a mistake. We had indicators," he said. The situation escalated overnight. Claire lowered her eyes. Victoria saw it. Claire. The regional manager did not want the room, but the room came to her anyway. "The missed pickups began 11 days ago," she said quietly. "Carrier withdrawals increased over the last week. I flagged alternate capacity 3 times. Victoria's gaze returned to Derek. He held the tablet tighter. "Those were preliminary alerts." "They were warnings," Claire said. Her voice did not rise. That made it harder to dismiss. Victoria felt something cold move through her chest, not panic, not yet, but recognition. Hayes Meridian had been built to look clean from above. Dashboards, vendor tiers, compliance systems, preferred carrier rankings, executive summaries. She had trusted the structure because she had built much of it herself. But structure was only useful when the people inside it told the truth. "Who can move before sunrise?" she asked. Derek started to answer, but Claire had already turned her laptop. The screen showed one name at the top of the emergency carrier list. Mason Coal Logistics. 31 active trucks. Reefer availability. Midwest emergency coverage. 98.7% on-time performance. Victoria stared at the name. 3 years folded into the room without asking permission, the glass lobby, the folder, the quiet boy with the red toy truck, Mason Cole picking it up from the polished floor without showing anger. Derek spoke fast. "That operation is not approved for primary contract work." Claire looked at him. "Neither are delays." The room went silent. Victoria set both hands on the conference table and leaned forward slightly, enough for everyone to understand the next sentence would not be delegated. "Call him." Derek did not move. "Victoria, I strongly recommend we exhaust approved partners first." She looked at the red map, then at the man who had kept the truth soft until it became dangerous. "We exhausted them when we trusted them." Derek's face changed, just a fraction. Victoria turned to Claire. "Get me Mason Cole's direct number." Claire nodded once and began typing. On the screen, the red markers held steady, each one a promise at risk. Victoria watched the name Mason Cole Logistics glow against the dark glass of the boardroom and understood that the company she had built on scale was about to ask for help from the man it had once decided was too small. Victoria did not wait for Mason Cole to call back from a number on a spreadsheet. She asked Claire for the address, took her coat from the back of the chair, and left the boardroom while the red map still filled the glass wall behind her. Derek followed her into the hallway with his tablet in one hand and controlled panic in his voice. "You are going there in person?" Victoria kept walking. "Yes. At this hour?" "Especially at this hour." The elevator doors closed before he could build another objection. 28 minutes later, Victoria's black company sedan turned off the paved road and rolled into a gravel yard lit by sodium lamps and truck headlights. It was 5:07 in the morning. The sky above the eastern edge of Ohio was still dark blue, the kind of dark that loosens slowly before dawn. There was no glass lobby here, no marble floor, no reception desk designed to make visitors feel small. There was a chain-link fence, a low office trailer with warm light in the windows, a row of tractors idling in the cold, and drivers moving with the quiet coordination of people who did not need to be told what mattered. Victoria stepped out of the sedan and immediately noticed the sound. Not noise. Rhythm. Air brakes releasing. Boots on gravel. A reefer unit humming steadily. A driver calling out a seal number. Someone checking tire pressure with a flashlight held under one arm. At the far side of the yard, a whiteboard behind the office window showed routes marked in colored lines, driver names, fuel stops, rest windows, and weather notes written clearly enough to read from outside. Mason Cole stood near the first row of trucks with a clipboard in one hand, wearing a dark jacket over a work shirt, his breath visible in the cold. He was speaking to Raymond Pike, who listened with a paper cup of coffee in one hand and the calm of a man who had already seen enough bad mornings to know which ones could still be saved. Mason looked up before Victoria reached him. He did not seem surprised. That unsettled her more than if he had looked angry. "Ms. Hayes," he said. "Not warm. Not rude. Accurate." Victoria stopped several feet away, conscious of the gravel under her polished shoes and the diesel in the air. Derek arrived in a second car moments later and stepped out with the stiff expression of someone entering a place he had once dismissed from a distance. Mason looked past him once, then back to Victoria. "You have 48 stranded loads," he said. Victoria's face did not change, but her silence answered. Mason glanced toward the office. 46 now. 2 have already been recovered by another regional carrier near Chicago. Claire had sent him the file, Victoria realized. Or someone had. He had not waited for permission to understand the problem. Through the office window, she saw Owen at a small desk with a math worksheet, a pencil, and the same red toy semi-truck sitting beside a stack of route folders. He was older now, but she recognized him instantly, not because she had cared to remember him then, but because memory has a cruel way of sharpening when regret arrives. 3 years earlier, that child had watched his father be dismissed in her lobby. Now he sat inside the operation her company needed before sunrise. Mason followed her glance and said nothing. That restraint was worse than accusation. Victoria looked around the yard again. The trucks were not new. Some wore fresh paint over older lives. One still had a slightly different shade on the driver's door. But every light worked. Every driver seemed to know where to stand, where to sign, what to check, when to move. This was not a desperate man with trucks. This was a system. Mason handed Raymond the clipboard, then turned fully toward Victoria. "If you are here to ask whether we can move the freight, the answer is yes." Derek stepped forward. "We will need to verify capacity, insurance, compliance, driver availability, lane coverage." Mason looked at him quietly. "You already did. 7 times." No one spoke. A truck rolled slowly past them toward the gate, its headlights sweeping over the gravel, over Victoria's coat, over Derek's tablet, over the Mason Cole Logistics logo on the door. Victoria watched it go and felt the first honest weight of the morning settle on her shoulders. The yard she had never respected was already doing what her boardroom could not. The office trailer was warmer than the yard, but not by much. A small electric heater worked under the window with the steady determination of equipment that had been asked to do more than it was built for. Route maps covered one wall. A maintenance board covered another. The air smelled like coffee, printer paper, diesel carried in on jackets, and the faint rubber scent of new floor mats Mason had installed himself 3 months earlier. Victoria Hayes stepped inside and stopped for half a second, not because the room impressed her in the way executive offices were designed to impress, but because nothing in it was wasted. Every clipboard had a place. Every route had a color. Every driver name had a time beside it. Owen sat at the small desk near the corner with his math worksheet, his red toy semi-truck parked beside a pencil sharpener. He looked up when she entered, recognized her slowly, and then looked back down at his paper. That quiet recognition did more than any accusation could have done. Mason did not introduce the moment. He moved to the route board and picked up a black marker. "We can recover 32 loads directly," he said. 14 through partner carriers we trust. 2 are already being handled near Chicago. Your medical equipment moves first. Refrigerated food second. Factory parts third unless the Ohio line confirms shutdown risk before 5:45. Victoria looked at the board. It was cleaner than the crisis dashboard in her conference room. Derek Sloan stood near the door, visibly uncomfortable in the cramped space, holding his tablet like it might protect him from the lack of marble. "We will need this routed through Hayes Meridian Dispatch," he said. Mason capped the marker and turned. No, the word was quiet, and because it was quiet, it filled the office completely. Derek blinked. "Excuse me." Mason looked at Victoria, not Derek. "If we take this, dispatch runs through my office until the loads are delivered. Your people can monitor. They do not override driver rest, weather calls, equipment checks, or lane changes." Derek's face tightened. "That is not how our emergency contracts are structured." Mason nodded once. "Then structure this one correctly." Raymond Pike, standing by the coffee pot, took a slow sip and said nothing. Victoria set her phone face down on the desk. Mason saw it. So did Derek. "What else?" she asked. Derek turned toward her sharply, but she did not look at him. Mason opened a folder from the table. It was not new. The corners were worn. Victoria recognized the format before she recognized the papers: insurance certificates, maintenance records, safety logs, delivery history, the same categories Derek had used for years to keep him outside. "Transparent contract," Mason said. "Written rate confirmations before wheels move. Detention paid when your customers hold my drivers past agreed windows. Fuel surcharge honored. No delayed payments. No verbal side promises. My drivers get treated like professionals at every dock." Derek let out a strained laugh. "You are negotiating while our freight is sitting?" Mason's expression did not change. "I am protecting the people who will move it." The room went still. Outside the trailer, a tractor rolled past the window, headlights cutting through the blue-black morning. Owen erased something on his worksheet, careful not to look up. Victoria saw his small hand press the paper flat, and she remembered him in the lobby 3 years earlier, picking up his toy truck from the polished floor after Derek made his father feel small. She had not said anything then. Silence had seemed efficient. Now it felt expensive. "And Derek?" Mason asked. Derek looked up. Victoria did too. Mason kept his voice even. "He does not touch dispatch. He does not contact my drivers. He does not move my lanes to one of his preferred vendors once the crisis is contained." Derek's mouth opened. "That is an outrageous implication." Mason looked at him for 1 second, no longer than necessary. "It is a condition." Victoria stood very still. The old version of her would have defended the hierarchy first and asked questions later. The old version of her had done that 7 times without noticing the pattern. She looked at the worn folder, the route board, the child doing homework beside freight paperwork, the drivers outside checking tires in the cold before dawn. Then she looked at Derek, and for the first time that morning, she did not see an operations director managing complexity. She saw a man afraid of losing control over a system he had made too comfortable for himself. Victoria picked up the pen from the desk and signed the emergency agreement Mason had placed in front of her. "Your terms," she said. Mason did not smile. He took the paper, checked the signature, and handed it to Raymond. "Start with Joliet." Raymond nodded and opened the trailer door. Cold air moved through the office. Outside, engines were already turning over. Mason looked at Victoria once. "We move in 6 minutes." She had come to ask a small fleet for help. She was leaving the office understanding that the fleet was small only to people who measured capacity from too far away. 6 minutes later, the first Mason Coal Logistics truck rolled through the gate with its headlights cutting across the gravel and its trailer sealed for Joliet. The second followed 30 seconds behind it. Then the third. By 5:29 in the morning, the yard that Victoria Hayes had once imagined as too small for serious work was moving with a precision her glass boardroom had failed to produce. Drivers checked mirrors, confirmed route numbers, called out seal matches, and pulled onto the road one by one without noise or confusion. Mason stood near the gate with a clipboard in one hand and his phone in the other, not raising his voice, not hurrying anyone past the rules that kept people safe. Owen stood just inside the office trailer window, watching the trucks leave with his red toy semi-truck pressed against the glass. Victoria noticed that Mason looked toward the window once before the fourth truck pulled out. It was a small glance, brief enough for most people to miss. She did not miss it. The first delivery confirmation came at 7:12. Medical equipment recovered and rolling east. At 8:03, a refrigerated load outside Cedar Rapids was transferred cleanly and back inside its delivery window. By 9:40, factory parts near Fort Wayne were moving under a route Mason had adjusted twice because of construction and driver hours. Claire Donnelly sent updates from Hayes Meridian, each message shorter than the last because the crisis was becoming less theoretical and more solved. Derek Sloan stayed in the yard office for the first hour, then stopped pretending anyone needed him there. When he attempted to reroute one recovery load through a preferred partner, Victoria saw the message, deleted the override, and removed him from emergency vendor decisions before the truck reached the highway. She did it without announcement. That made it worse for him and cleaner for everyone else. By noon, 38 of the 48 shipments were either delivered, recovered, or confirmed in motion. By late afternoon, the red map at Hayes Meridian had turned mostly amber, then green in places that had been glowing like failure before dawn. Victoria stood outside Mason's office trailer as the last of the early recovery trucks returned under a sky washed pale by winter sun. Gravel dust clung to the lower edge of her coat. She did not brush it off. Mason came out with Raymond Pike beside him, both men tired in the quiet way of people who had spent the day preventing other people's mistakes from becoming disasters. Owen followed with 2 paper cups of water and handed one to his father before offering the other to Victoria. She took it with both hands. "Thank you," she said. Owen nodded, polite but careful. Mason looked at the yard instead of at her. One truck backed slowly into position. Another driver logged mileage near the fuel tank. The board inside the office had been updated so many times that the colored lines looked like weather systems crossing a country Mason. Understood by habit. Victoria waited until Raymond stepped away. "I owe you an apology," she said. Mason did not answer immediately. He checked one last confirmation on his phone, then put it in his pocket. "For today?" he asked. The question was not sharp. That made it harder. Victoria looked toward the office window, where the red toy semi-truck sat on Owen's desk beside his homework. "For before today." Mason followed her gaze. "You made a business decision." "I made an easy one," she said. "There is a difference." He looked at her then, steady and unreadable. She had expected anger, maybe satisfaction, maybe some sentence she would have deserved after 7 rejections and 1 desperate morning. Mason gave her none of that. "I did not build this fleet so you would regret turning me down," he said. "I built it so my son would know a promise is supposed to arrive where you said it would." The yard went quiet around the sentence. Not completely. Trucks still idled. Drivers still moved. The world kept working. But Victoria felt the word settle in a place no performance review or executive retreat had ever reached. Behind them, another delivery confirmation sounded from the office computer. Claire's message came through a second later: final critical load delivered, penalties avoided. Hayes Meridian would survive the day because every road out of trouble had run through the fleet it once refused to see. Victoria looked at Mason Cole, at the old trucks lined up under the fading light, at the drivers who trusted him, at the boy who had watched his father leave her lobby without bitterness and had now watched those same doors open from the other side. She understood then that scale had never been the measure she thought it was. Some companies were large because they owned more trucks. Others became necessary because every person inside them understood the weight of keeping their word.